All right, tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming along to this hearing for the Code of Practice for Subdivision, Land Use and Development, a joint hearing between Southland District Council and Invercargill City Council. I'm Michael Morris. I am the Manager of Governance and Legal, and it is a pleasure to welcome you all here today for this hearing. First things first, before we get started, is the safety procedures. Please do not walk in the middle of the circle. It is full of trip hazards, and we would ask you to please stay outside the desk circle. Obviously, in the event of an evacuation, we had our trial yesterday, so we know it works. Staff will escort you out of the building, and we assemble over by the wall of H&J's Smith, so that way. Toilets you have walked past. Male toilets are first, and then female toilets are a bit further along the corridor, both on the left. So with that, and in the event of earthquake, I think we all know what to do. So I'm not going to go into those details. So first order of business, as this is the first time the Joint Committee has met, is to call for nominations from the committee to be a chair. So I now invite any nominations to be made.
I'd like to nominate Darren Ludlow, please.
Do we have a seconder for that?
I'd like to second it.
Thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. That is passed unanimously. Congratulations, Councillor Ludlow. I now hand over to you.
Thank you. Good thing nobody else wanted it. Thank you. Welcome along. This is actually quite a unique event, and I congratulate staff from both councils in working together for a combined code of practice. And it's an approach that I think certainly the professionals working in the sector will welcome. We're all present, so there are no apologies. So Rhiannon, could I ask you to introduce the report and also the staff that are attending, please?
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora koutou. I'm Rhiannon Suter. I'm the Strategy and Policy Manager here at ICC, along with Teresa Kavanagh at Southland District Council. We've been coordinating this process. So I'll briefly introduce the report. As the Chair has said, this has been a process that officers have been working on for quite a while, with the goal of providing a more coordinated response across the region, both to support the developer community and to enable a more responsive code that can be updated more frequently to reflect changes to best practice around such issues as climate change, te ao Māori, and how we deal with water, for example. So this report is presented on that basis. It speaks to the recommendations that could be made from this committee to the two separate councils to revoke the existing bylaws on the basis, as the previous reports and consultation materials have outlined, that this code of practice is recommended as a more responsive structure. Following the consultation, it also speaks to the matters that have been raised by the submitters, some of which are here today to speak to their submissions. The technical teams at both councils have met and gone through all the submissions, and these form the basis of the recommendation that's sitting in the report in front of you. It is recommended that when we have a new joint code of practice, that it be in place for 1 year before review. This is to reflect the fact that this is a unique process in the two councils working together. There will no doubt be some items which will need to be updated to reflect practice, and it also will give more time for engagement and partnership with Te ao Marama to improve the elements relating to Te ao Māori within the process. One last thing around the process that I will mention is that this hearing today is regarding the code of practice element. It is not regarding the elements for the RMA district plan changes, which will be handled separately by each council following the decision of this hearing panel today. So on that basis, I'll just introduce officers on the ICC side. Grant here has been coordinating from the technical perspective, and so he will coordinate the kind of answering of any questions and the explanation of recommendations. Hannah, to my left, has been coordinating for writing the report from the ICC side and pulling together the structure of the report, so she is across all the detail. I'll now pass to you, Teresa, to add anything else you want to add on the basis of the report and to introduce our colleagues from Southland District Council.
Thank you, Rhiannon. I'm Teresa. I'm on the policy team at South District Council. I've got nothing further to add, thank you. But the staff here, we've got Nick Lewis from our roading team, we've got Brian Ward from our water and waste team, and Mark Day from our community facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Any of the hearings panel have any questions at this stage? So my intention is to move the first 4 recommendations, which is to receive the report, to receive the written submissions, which is item 4, agree to receive 1 late submission and hear from that Kāinga order, and note the submitters that are to be heard, and then we'll get into hearing those who wish to speak. Any questions about that? Nope. Wonderful. Well, I'll move from the chair then the first 4 recommendations, if there's a seconder. Thanks, Paul. Questions, comments? Put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. So that brings us through to the first of our submitters, which is Lloyd Gauntlet on behalf of Absolute Land. At this stage, I should point out that Absolute Land do hold offices immediately next door to my day job, but Lloyd and I haven't had any conversations about this anyway. Lloyd, please take a seat. Welcome along.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity just to present today. I am going to walk through 6 different areas of my submission. The first being 5.3.17.3, and this is regarding the engineering design required for all right-of-ways, all private right-of-ways. If I can just quote the proposed wording in the Code of Practice, private pavements shall be designed as for public roads, and residential rural pavements shall have a minimum formation thickness in accordance with Austroads guidelines, and then they shall be designed to 30 years. I would question whether this is appropriate for up to 3 dwellings coming off a single right-of-way. The reason being that the right-of-way is often constructed prior to dwellings, and this is following, so the dwellings will come after 224 is issued, and those right-of-ways will see heavy traffic for construction, that sort of thing, and then it places an onus on those right-of-ways that's over and above what we would expect for smaller right-of-ways. The second issue they come to is 6.2.8, which is regarding the calculation of climate change. So the proposed Code of Practice references some factors that designers are to be aware of. And once again, quoting from the rainfall design charts shall be adjusted to take into account the predicted increase in rainfall intensities from the effects of climate change. To do this, the designer shall use the following factors: a temperature increase of 1.5 degrees, a design horizon to 2050, an RCP of 6, and a design event duration of 6 hours. This is fundamentally not correct when designing for climate change adjustment. So if I can hone in on RCP 6, this is a representative concentration pathway provided by NIWA, and this is not subject to a direct 1.5 degree change. This is actually a model based on further models provided to NIWA from the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change. So to request a 1.5 degree calculation on top of RCP 6 is not a correct way of interpreting that information provided. Furthermore, the design horizon is very short, and the event durations of 6 hours are very long in a lot of cases, and will end up in under designing stormwater mitigation, that is. And then so the next point is 7.4a, which is wastewater disposal within 10 years. So from the proposed code, no pipe system is immediately available or will not be available within 10 years of the subdivision application. So this is essentially stating that we cannot install, the developer cannot install on-site disposal systems if there's an intent that the infrastructure will be provided within 10 years. I would challenge that this is not a set or measurable condition, because although they may be in the LTP, there's no guarantee that within 10 years that infrastructure will be built. And so if we have a site that under the district plan or the rest of the code is capable of disposing wastewater to site, this is effectively declining what is a viable development. Furthermore, that development may be connected at a later date if it is given the go ahead to have on-site disposal at this point in time. And so that is the same reflections on 8.3.5.12, which is regarding the water connections. The same wording is present. No development within 10 years if there is proposed infrastructure. Brings me to R3A, which is in the standard drawings. The M4 minor local road, minimum legal width is 20 metres. This, in fact, isn't quite aligned. Well, it is aligned currently with table 5.4, but I note that on other submissions there was a deviation from the 20 metre blanket within a minor local road. There's no infrastructure reason that I can see that we would extend them to 20 metres. There's enough corridor width in there. They're under the 4404, the tables within there for suburban zoning brings those right down based, brings the legal width right down based on different dwelling units within those serviced by those roads. And so I think it's in the city's best interest that those are reduced in order to densify development, because I see densifying development as an objective that we would want to see from an infrastructure perspective. That's also supported by the New Zealand Urban Design Protocol, which I believe that ICC in particular has adopted, in part at least. Brings me to R3A once again, where there's a statement about 6 by 6 metre entranceways. So an entranceway adjoining a collector or hire use road shall have 6 metre carriageway for 6 metres entering. This promotes some safety concerns that I have, and I'll refer to design principles of OS roads and also further advice documentation from NZTA on those two principles, one of them being driver workload and the other being perceived priority. If we consider driver workload, if it's too high, the advice is that this leads to compensation by ignoring relevant information. This is from the driver's perspective. So if we consider the scenario where we're in high traffic, the driver wishes to turn into this right-of-way, we have pedestrians and cyclists coming from the same direction. The vehicle believing they have space to enter, if there's a vehicle sitting coming out of that right of way, has pressure to do so based on traffic behind them. And then if we add into that the perceived priority, this is based on the conflict between road users if priority is not clear. And so once leaving the live lane, we would expect that the priority is actually with the pedestrians and the cyclists. This is further enforced by delineation, i.e. curb and channel. The driver under high workload may believe that they now retain priority, which heightens their response to leave the live lane and cross in front of cyclists or pedestrians. I believe this creates a more significant conflict than had they stayed in the live lane. My final point is standard drawings R13 through to R16 regarding the sump pipework. Currently, there is pipework that comes out of the rear of the sump to an inspection point and then makes its way back through under the curb into the roadside in most cases, to the carriageway. This isn't desirable for a number of reasons. It's just more maintenance, it's harder to maintain, you can't have direct access to each junction. It takes up room in the berms. It will affect the hydraulics of that system. And it's not easy to define where the pipe runs go because they're no longer in straight lines. So there are examples of this in 4404 building code. Other territorial authorities present this in their code of practices, that you can make direct runs from those sumps with trapping hydrocarbons just by using a Y in that alignment. That's all I wish to speak to. Thank you.
Thanks, Lloyd. Questions? Can I just ask, when you were talking about intensification of density in the urban area, that is of course dependent on infrastructural capacity, you'd accept that?
Correct.
Thanks. And when you were talking about the right-of-way requirements, was there any consultation you've done with traffic management engineers around that, or are you doing that within your own skill set?
No, that's within my own skill set.
Thanks, Lloyd. Any further questions? If not, sorry, Paul.
Yep.
So you would have seen the responses from staff to your
Correct.
submissions.
Yep.
Are you satisfied with those outcomes? Or?
So the items that I've spoken to now are ones that I'm not satisfied with the outcomes.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions? Thanks, Lloyd. Appreciate the submission and for making time available this afternoon.
Thank you.
Albie. Welcome along.
Te tātou katoa. I'm a civil engineer based at WSP here in Invercargill. WSP is the premier design and engineering consultancy of Aotearoa. We've been in New Zealand for 150 years and currently have 2,000 staff in 36 offices. In general, WSP supports the code of practice. We acknowledge this code of practice is of better quality than the previous two bylaws, and appreciate the effort that's gone into from both ICC and SCC. We submitted 56 individual comments and note that 38 have been accepted as is, and comment some of the ones that weren't accepted. One of the comments here on section 5.4.12, it was accepted in relating to tactile surface ground indicators, so the yellow pavers that people that have low vision rely on. It was accepted they were going to refer to the standards within the code of practice. I don't think it goes far enough. I raised this in 2016, and since then there's been lots of examples around Invercargill in particular where they've been installed incorrectly. So when they're installed incorrectly, they're a danger to people that are blind. I think you need to have more detail in there so people can know that they can do it correctly rather than just referencing a standard. I think we need to have a bit more information to upskill industry and council staff as well on the right way to do it. The next section, climate change, as mentioned by Lloyd. This section as it stands is a contradiction. It can't remain as is. You can't wait 12 months. Lots of other people have noted it. It needs to change. I'm happy to answer more questions afterwards, but it needs fixed. It doesn't make sense. If the one thing you change is that, I'd be happy. The next one is relating to manholes. Exciting stuff. I've referenced the CCPA guidelines for pipe penetrations. This relates to the angle that pipes come into manholes and where the joins are between the manholes themselves and pipes. I've noticed across the industry contractors get this wrong. They order the wrong manholes and they make them, the holes are in the wrong place. It means that the manholes aren't installed properly, and basically the manufacturer's guarantees don't fly, and you probably won't get your design life that you need. So I think you need to add them in there so they're installed properly. 7.3.8.4.4 is the internal fall through sewer manholes. In that old ICC code of practice, there was a nice wee table that had the falls through the sewer manholes based on the angle of the pipes. Obviously, the sharper the angle, you need a bit more fall to the sewage to be able to get round, otherwise you can get blockages. It's been removed. I think that table needs to go back in. Pretty easy cut and paste on that one. 8.3.10.1, seismic design. The ICC water mains, they have the laterals, the property connections, they come off at 90 degrees perpendicular to the main. And what that means is in an earthquake, and what happened in Christchurch, is that the pipe can move separate to the laterals, and all those laterals, those connections pop off, and you have basically leaks under the ground at a whole lot of property connections, and they spend a lot of time in Christchurch digging them back up and reconnecting them. So we're suggesting if you connect them parallel with the main and sweep them round, you add essentially slack into the main, which means that they're more resilient in an earthquake. Christchurch are doing it, Timaru are doing it. It means that any new water mains, if they follow that standard, you won't be running around trying to dig them up after an earthquake to get water back to people. Landscaping. There was a reduction in the response to 2 years. It was 5 years. We were happy with 5 years. Just wanted to point out a bit of a contradiction. At the start of the landscaping, it talks about how, I'll quote it, opportunities for landscaping are diverse, ranging from specimen tree planting to planting with associated existing indigenous vegetation, traffic management devices, riparian margins, wetlands, swales, rain gardens, ponds, reserves, and specific landscape features in development. That's great, we're all for that. But then later on, it states that if there's any landscaping proposed that is more than minimum, that council want to approve the cost. So it seems like you're trying to have it both ways. You want the developer to put lots of landscaping in and good stormwater treatment and, you know, move with the times, which is great, but then you don't want to pay for maintenance. So 5 years of maintenance on the developer, I think, is suitable. After 5 years, the maintenance cost by the council should be low enough that it should be able to be picked up by the regular maintenance. This is as an example, with the Edendale roundabout and the Ellis Road roundabout, we've put thousands of plants in, and it is a new thing for people to try and get used to the maintenance of them, but they do provide a benefit for stormwater treatment and for just having native plants. And the final point I want to make, there's been a few other submitters have commented on redefining the term geoprofessional. Term comes from 4404, which is the overall standard, and it's actually quite clear what it encompasses. And by lowering that standard, you take on risk of unqualified or underqualified practitioners supervising and certifying works that potentially they may not be qualified to do, or they shouldn't be doing. So we recommend that you stay with the term geoprofessional. That's it.
Thanks, Albie.
Thank you.
Questions?
Oh, sorry.
Yep. Can't get out of the Graham Norton
No,
chair
not
just
at all.
yet. Your comments around climate change, what are the standards that you're suggesting would be better than those that we've put
It's
forward?
not really a change. It was some of the standards contradict one another. As Lloyd said, RCP 6 is fine. We accept that, but that contradicts the 1.5 degrees climate change rise. Because it could be more, it could be less. The RCP 6 sets that standard. In our submission, I think a few others, we commented on what we suggested, which is just RCP 6 using HERDS, which is the NIWA. They have a website, so anywhere in Southland, you type in the address, it gives you the rainfall parameters for RCP 6, which is that climate change parameter, and then use that in your design based on the relevant time of concentration, which is the catchment size. If you've got a big catchment, you have a larger time of concentration, small catchment, you have a little one. So the 6 hours doesn't make sense either because catchments are different sizes. They need time of concentration relative to the size of your catchment.
Thanks, Ellie. Other questions?
Just on that subject, is not actually in what you're saying this morning, but I noticed the difference in culvert pipe sizes between the Wakakatahi 3.75 and what we're got in here at 300. Sorry, 375 versus 300. Do you have a comment on that, given climate change?
I think it's less to do with climate change and more the fact of maintenance. If you put a bigger pipe in, you can often walk away for it for longer. A lot of our culverts don't get cleaned out as often as they should, so it can be a way of minimizing the maintenance long term, because that 375 might half full with sediment, but it still operates and it still has capacity. NZTA on all of their sump leads have a 300 mil requirement, and it's not because of capacity, it's because of maintenance. You can walk away for a long time and know that they'll still function and they won't block. So it's a practical point of view. If you put a bigger pipe in, you don't need to deal with the maintenance.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any further questions? If not, thanks, Albie. Appreciate your submission and your time this afternoon. If we can get Josh in, I think Josh is coming via Zoom. Sorry, Josh, I've got my back to you. My apologies. Welcome along.
Kia ora. So I'm Josh Neville. I'm the South Island Development Planning Team Leader for Kāinga Ora, and sort of we look after the policy and regulatory planning side of the organisation. So a brief bit of background, just in case no one's aware. Kāinga Ora is a Crown-owned entity formed in 2019, and it brought together Housing New Zealand, HLC and Kiwi Build, as well as a couple of others. We've got two primary roles, one being a public landlord and the other one partnering with the development community, Māori, local and central government on urban development outcomes. So in Invercargill, Southland, we've got a little over 300 homes and planning intentions for 21 to FY24, we've got about 50 homes either in purchase, construction or planning. Just a high level from our submissions, probably more high level than some of the technical experts that you're hearing from. So we largely support the shift from bylaws to a code of practice, and we're pleased to see it as a joint response. As much as possible, we like to see the matters addressed outside of the district plan where it's able to be addressed outside of the district plan, and that just avoids those Schedule 1 processes where further changes are needed. From our submission, I'll just cover off the key topics. Largely, we accept the staff response there and the matters raised by other submitters. There's a few that we align quite well on. So we were surprised, I think, when we were reviewing it, not seeing Māori design statements and embedded throughout, and sort of Māori design principles being taken into account with some of the design. So understanding that staff response has come back and said that that's up for review with the 1 year review, and that's further incorporation of those are likely. following some work with Te Ao Marama. So we're happy to see that, and would be pleased to see mana whenua and Te Ao Māori design principles be added through the likes of designer checklists. Noting that this is pretty standard in most of the codes of practices around New Zealand. We also want to see a few amendments to the roading design, and I know it hasn't been accepted this one, but we'd like to see a low speed or a smaller cross-section road. Largely the focus for that is around redevelopment and intensification areas where you're seeing urban and brownfield areas get redeveloped over time, and more likely this is sort of in line with the typical size of a right-of-way or a joel, but being a public road, it enables the likes of free public access to and through sites. Finally, measures to improve just the stormwater flooding response and sort of climate change there. And in light of sort of recent events, I think reading through the code of practice, we were just concerned that it hadn't gone far enough to address the potential future impacts of climate change. And I see that that's covered quite extensively too by other submitters. So that's probably something that will get reviewed into the future. But yeah, definitely just some further work on that would be something that would support. Aside from those matters and the other matters raised in our submission, we're largely supportive of the code of practice though. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Questions, councillors? Just in around recommended speeds, isn't that actually part of another process that council goes through, Josh?
Speed limits, yes, setting that.
Yeah.
I think in the cross section for the roading design, we were sort of suggesting that a low speed environment cross section be added, and that would be for a smaller road width, enabling the likes of if you were redeveloping a brownfield site or an agglomeration of residential parcels, you could introduce a smaller road through the site that could become a public road. At the moment, seeing in the code of practice there isn't much scope for that to become a public road, less commenting on the actual setting of a speed limit through there. But the design standard for something like a below 30 k's an hour speed limit road, that's what we're intended for in our submission point there.
Thanks for the clarification, Josh. More a design process rather than the formal limit. Paul?
Josh, under point 6 of your submission, I see you saying both the matters supported and the changes requested are to basically ensure that Kāinga Ora can carry out its statutory obligations and fulfil its urban development functions. So do you think there's impediments to that now that this proposal eliminate, or is there a wee way to go, or what?
Largely, this is an improvement, particularly when I'm looking at our development aspirations. So this will assist in that process. In particular, the roading design one, I'm thinking about a particular development that we're looking at that is still going through the process. Aside from that's more I don't see this having significant impediments to our development aspirations there. Other things such as district plan processes and enablement of density and things do create impediments to achieving some of the outcomes that we're seeking.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, thank you, Josh. Appreciate your time and for forwarding the submission on behalf of Kāinga Ora.
Thank you very much.
Don, welcome along.
Right. Look, I'm not going to go through all the minor technical stuff that I've included in my submission. There's just a few of the points that I've raised here that I want to speak to. I guess the first one, 3246. Yeah, it would be good if we've had a slightly different policy in the past between the two councils in respect of council taking over and maintaining services on private land. As a general rule, the district council have been happy to take sewers and water mains over and maintain them despite the fact that they were located on private land within a subdivision, usually within a right of way. Whereas, I'll stand to be corrected, but I don't think the city, generally it hasn't encouraged that, and in fact it's refused to. It would be nice to see some clarification of that. I think those services should be taken over by council where they're accessible. I'm not suggesting council takes over private drains as serving one or two houses where they're down the back of the house or anything like that. But where we're serving multiple lots off a right of way, the service is located within the right of way, so they're readily accessible for the council staff to come and maintain them. They're given, the council's given an easement so that it's got that right. Then I think those ratepayers deserve the same level of service as their counterparts who live on the street. The connection of power and telephone services, generally speaking, so that's 3247. Yeah, looking back, Southland District Council have had a pretty rigorous policy of insisting on power and telephone connections at the time of subdivision. Invercargill City haven't, and the world hasn't stopped turning just because the Invercargill City didn't require power and telephone connections. And it may seem like an insignificant issue. I can assure you it's not. It's a major issue when people are doing infill subdivision. I'm not talking here about greenfield subdivision. It goes without saying, if you do a greenfield subdivision of multiple lots, I can tell you now you won't sell the allotments without power and telephone to the boundary. But on infill subdivision in the urban areas, it's an unnecessary expense at the time that you're developing. It's been a cash cow for Chorus. We've had the stupid situation in the Southland District Council where we've had copper connections provided to allotments which will never ever been used at considerable expense. Now, I must admit, under recent changes in policy at the District Council, that's got sorted to some extent. But anyway, I would advocate that those services are not required until such time as somebody builds, and it should be left until that time. So that's largely what my submission there is about. I'm simply saying you should simply demonstrate the services are available but not put them on. Just height datums. I know it's a survey related matter, but it's an important one that I think the Invercargill City Council staff are overlooking and not appreciating the significance of it. The District Council's adopted New Zealand datum 2016, which is New Zealand's official datum. As surveyors, we have absolutely no choice. It's mandatory for us to work in that datum. All legal documents must be in terms of it, and it is high time for the city to switch over to it. I'm telling the City Council engineering staff now, you will have no choice eventually. This is an opportune time to do it. The datum you're working in terms of at the moment hasn't been maintained for years and years and years, and there are simply no reliable benchmarks left. Nobody's maintaining the heights on those benchmarks anymore. Most of them have 2016 vertical datum heights on them, and they are maintained taking into consideration earth deformation. But your old datum that you're working on at the moment is not, and so you are simply increasing the amount of error in the work. So good on the Southland District for changing over to a constant datum, but City Council, you really need to have a good look at that. Stormwater. Yeah, I've got to say, look, it's one of the things I specialise in is stormwater. So I perhaps take a bit more interest in it than the average guy. I'm a keen advocate of stormwater retention. I don't like the concept of piping your stormwater off site and discharging it into streams. Wherever possible, the code should be encouraging the retention of stormwater on site We've got good, well-established practices that are proving that that can be done. And so, I just as a general thing there, I think there needs to be more encouragement for that in the code. That's all I can say about that. A few technical things I'll just skip over, not worth wasting your time on them. Down to 538, no exit roads. My interpretation of the code is there's quite a discouragement there for no exit roads. It's a so-called modern policy to build these loop roads rather than cul-de-sacs, and I think it's absolute rubbish. I drive around these horrible new subdivisions in Christchurch, and I don't know how the hell anybody can take pride in those things. They're absolutely disgusting. That's how I describe them. I wouldn't want to live in one of them, and I believe it's completely flawed policy, and people living down small cul-de-sacs enjoy a considerable benefit from the fact they're living in a small cul-de-sac with probably no more than about 20 other properties. Most of them will know everybody in the street. If one of them's getting out of line with tearing down the street in their car too fast, it's usually not long before they get sorted out by a few of the neighbours. You lose all that when you put a loop road, when you turn that cul-de-sac into a loop road. You get all sorts of traffic down that road that doesn't belong there. So I believe there should be more encouragement. There certainly shouldn't be discouragement in the code against that sort of thing. Skip over the next few things. Down to 634, back to stormwater again. Southern District Council use a 5-10-year return period. City Council wants to stick with the 5-year. Sorry, did I get that right? Southern District 10-year. City Council wants to stick with a 5-year return period. I probably can understand, look, I might be misinterpreting it. Perhaps the reason for that is there's been an awful lot of stormwater work done in terms of improving water mains over, since the '84 floods, and that was probably all based on a 5-year return period. And so I guess maybe it creates some problems if you now impose a standard of 10 years, but and there might be some other reasons I'm missing, but personally I think it should be 10 years anyway. This recent nonsense that's gone up on in Auckland with the flooding, and that's going to, plenty of other people are saying, so I don't want to repeat stuff that other people are saying, but clearly stormwater is a big thing now, and it's going to get bigger. If there's a really sound, logical reason for sticking for 5 years, that's fine. But I can assure you, all the stuff that I've done in the city in the last few years, in terms of retention and other things, have all been based on 10 years, and they've all been based on the RCP 8.5 scenario. That's NIWA's most pessimistic prediction of global warming outcomes. So I believe, and I'm not finding that using those factors is giving me any grief in coming up with retention devices and suitable ways of dealing with stormwater. So I would be advocating that the City Council have a look at that. This one's the next one, which is leading on from that, 6389 soakage devices. This and one of our other submitters prior to me was, I'm not sure if he was referring to this section or not, was advocating for retention of the term geoprofessional when it comes to assessing stormwater, soakage in particular. I've had 40 years of experience in that game. I'm not a geoprofessional, and I can assure you that I don't intend to give up that work. I've got a good track record in it. I don't believe that I need to be a geoprofessional in order to design a good soak-hole. I have the necessary skills in order to do that, and so that is a non-negotiable requirement on my part. I will not back down on this one. It would significantly affect the work I do. the term should be suitably qualified person. A couple of minor things about 1547. That's the wastewater on-site domestic wastewater standard. There's some minor things there, but the one that is important, and it's created some issues for me designing these systems. Some of the people here may or may not know me, but my specialty is designing on-site domestic wastewater systems and on-site stormwater systems. It probably accounts for about half of my workload, maybe more. I probably do somewhere in the order of about 200 to 300 of them a year. And there has been instances where this requirement to keep the wastewater system entirely within the property has caused us some grief, and it's been detrimental. It's forced me into less desirable forms of treatment because I had a small site to deal with, and in fact it's the wording in the existing code which this is taken from, which has caused me that grief. Have been completely sensible situations where we should have been able to dispose of our wastewater off-site on an adjacent property with suitable easements registered over the adjacent property, and we have not been able to do that, and as a result we've had to get into considerably more complex systems to get them on a small site, and that's not desirable when it comes to domestic wastewater. There's a very fundamental simple rule when it comes to those things. It's keep it simple, keep it as simple as you can. The more complex you make a system, the more chance there is that it will fail or give somebody grief in the future. So that is something I'd like to see gone, or qualified in such a way that at least it's not a prohibition, and it's certainly not prohibited under the law. They are quite common, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do them. We've in fact done a couple in recent times, and clearly they got through the approval process somehow unnoticed. In both cases there were resource consents issued for them by Environment South, and so it was possible that the TAs in those cases weren't, perhaps they accepted that and didn't enforce the rule. But it might seem like a minor issue, but it hasn't been for the couple of cases where it's impacted. So thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Dom. Can I just bring you back to the height datum?
Yeah.
And your encouragement for ICC to adopt NZVD 16.
Yeah.
Is that a process that would go through this code of practice or through the district plan?
No, through this code. Yeah, it's in the code. Yeah, look, the problem is survey control has to move with earth deformation, and so all our control marks are moving whether we like it or not. But unfortunately, while we continue with the existing City Council datum, which is Dunedin Bluff 1960, those marks aren't getting updated anymore. I must confess I can't just be certain when they stopped updating them, but they certainly don't update them now. A lot of those marks are the same marks that we're using under New Zealand vertical datum. In fact, just about all of them probably have New Zealand vertical datum heights on them. Those heights are continually updated as through earth deformation, but the heights that are assigned to them in the Dunedin Bluff datum aren't, and so it's inevitable that at some point in time we are going to have to, the City Council will have to switch. And I can understand their reluctance. It's a pain in the butt. All our existing plans, all our GIS, well, the GIS system's no trouble at all to change, because that's just a push of a button on the computer and the whole lot just gets changed over. The GIS guys here, if there are any, might not see it quite as simply as that. But yeah, it's a pain in the butt, to change. I know that, because you've got thousands of plans and different things that have been done in terms of the existing datum, but it's inevitable that we do need to change. Southern District, we did most of the data capture in our firm for the Southern District, and it's existing GIS stuff. I do need to sit down with their guys, because I know what the datums were for all the various towns, but that's, and so we do have to bring their stuff up to speed, but at least now they're in vertical in terms of 2016. Going forward, they'll be fine.
Thanks, Tom. Councillors, any further questions?
Just
Paul?
one, Mr. Chairman. Your comments about cul-de-sacs. What do you see a sort of a maximum number as being desirable in that situation?
Look, it's, you know, I never said absolutes, but, you know, probably about 20 odd houses, something like 20 odd units. You know, you might push that, and there might be occasions where you can push that. You never, you know, with all these things, it's dangerous to set absolutes, but 20, maybe 30. I can't sort of think of too many cul-de-sacs that I've done in living memory where we would have had much more than that in them. You know, there would have to be there'd have to be something a bit extreme about the case. There will certainly be geographical situations where it just doesn't, you know, you've got to do a longer cul-de-sac because there's just no other way of getting in there. Narrow, long piece of land that ends in a dead end type, you know. And so you might have justification for some more lots in some cases, but, you know, if you were going to have a 50 lots up a cul-de-sac, you certainly have to do some other things to control the traffic coming and going on it. You look at as Grant will attest, it's you know, perhaps I'm old school, but I met with Grant and the City Council team there recently. I've recently got involved in the Te subdivision, and it's previously been, the layout on that was previously looking heavily as a system of loop roads. In fact, there wasn't a single cul-de-sac in the whole thing. That's just, and so I suppose I'm probably going to be at loggerheads with Grant and his team shortly over that, because they're about to get the master plan from me in a few days' time. And there's loop roads where they're needed, but there's also a lot of cul-de-sacs and private right-of-ways, which is my way of doing things. You know, from a developer's point of view, we find them very popular. You know, just informal conversations that I've had with lay people and other professionals at conferences and since I met with Grant and his team, have reinforced my view. I've driven around Christchurch and looked at stuff which I'm repeating myself, I know, but I find it disgusting, quite frankly. I wouldn't want to live in those new subdivisions. I would not be proud of developing a subdivision like that. To me, it's all about providing a place for people to live, and traffic functionality is completely secondary to that. And I think that Grant and this team have got that back to front. They appear, and I hope I'm not doing them an injustice by misquoting him or whatever, but I think that they are too heavily focused on traffic movement as opposed to providing a place to live. Connectivity needs to be there, but going forward into the future, it needs to be there on foot and on bicycle, not by cars. You shouldn't be able to jump in your blooming car just to go and visit your neighbours around the next cul-de-sac or whatever. You should be able to walk through, but you also, you know, I just hate these loop roads. You know, I don't think they provide a good environment for people to live in. And I tell you what, economically, they're not a good idea. We get a couple more sections where that road was. So from a developer's point of view, they're a good thing. That's not what's motivating me here, because in a lot of cases, if I'm putting two cul-de-sacs in, you know, that are head to head, where there would have been a loop road, I'll usually put a piece of reserve in to form the link between the cul-de-sac heads, or I'll make sure there's a pedestrian link in there somewhere not too far away. So it's not really to do with trying to get greater yield for developers, but it's still relevant. Turning two cul-de-sacs into a loop will involve probably another 100 metres of road. There's that as well, so the economics do come into that as well. But yeah, look, it's mainly about neighbourhood. I would not want to live, if I had a choice, I would certainly want to live on a cul-de-sac rather than a loop road. The only people going up that cul-de-sac, apart from the odd person that's got lost, are people that live in that street.
Thanks, Dom. I think with Hipua Wai, we've done a plan change, and that's all. So we will assess any application on its merits at the time with an open mind. Trish.
Thank you, Don, for your submission and your comments. With reference to the cul-de-sac, have you had any feedback from the community? You mentioned you've heard some comments, but have you actually gone out to see what people like?
Only the sort of thing I was talking about there before, where I've talked to just lay people. Yeah, I suppose I mean I could ask the question around this room. What do you got? Where do you guys want to live? Would you sooner live in a nice, quiet, private street, or would you prefer to live on a loop street on a loop street where you've got other traffic coming through? I mean, to me, that's just common sense.
I appreciate that, but I think it's also important to hear the voice of the people now who live there. You know, not what sort of happened in the past. There are many elements I agree with you, but I would like to think that it's based on people's choices, well, you know, people's opinions as well.
Thanks, Trish. We stick to questions.
Sorry.
Thank you.
No, look, I've done no formal research. Just talking to my colleagues at conferences and talking to the odd person that that might come up over a cup of coffee or a beer or something like that.
Councillor Ruttenclaw.
Thank you, Dom, for your submission today and coming in. My question's around point 5.319 around your fencing, and you put the section implies that fencing road boundaries would be the norm, but there are many situations when fencing is not required, and this section should reflect it more clearly. Can you put some more explanation around that?
Sorry,
for me,
I apologize, I had difficulty hearing what section
sorry.
was that again?
Sorry,
5.319.
5.319 fencing.
The fencing one.
Yeah.
It was just an unusual one to me. It might already be in the code. I think it may already be in the existing code actually, but there's a lot of situations where frontages to subdivisions don't get fenced. I'd hate to see either or both of the councils starting to enforce what I think is actually already there, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's already there, but it's certainly never been enforced anyway. There's an awful lot of situations where we do subdivisions which are not fenced, and we often don't want them to be fenced actually.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No further questions? Thanks, Tom. Once again, a great submission, and thanks for your time this afternoon.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Councillors.
Trish. Welcome along.
I'll be quick. Only a couple of submissions. One was on telecommunications and the discretion the council has on telecommunications and electricity, so that they don't need to be installed if decided upon that way through a resource consent decision. And I'll just refer to comments that Don made on that one. Infill subdivision, I would agree that really, in some respects, the best time to be installing your telecom and your power is at the time of building consent. These cables don't join well. So your best option is to run a line up to the rear section and coil it up and bury it in the ground, so for a future date. And I can see that the staff response was to take telecommunications out of the requirement given the changes in technology. But I'll just add that I do support Don and his view with the requirement to install electrical services for infill subdivisions.
Just a quick question on that point, if you don't mind, Trish. Would it be relevant to include, I understand what you're saying about telecommunication and the demise of the phone, but fibre optic cable?
Well, people are doing their choices these days. I'm forced onto Wi-Fi. I live on Wilton Street. Fibre is going to be an issue to my property. I'm not developing, and so I'm on a Wi-Fi broadband connection, and a lot of people are not choosing to pay for a landline as well as their mobile. So I do note that the staff response throughout the hearing report was to take telecommunications off the table in terms of connection at development time. And I support the staff response to that.
Thanks, appreciate your comment, Trish.
Right, so my next one was on vehicle crossings, and I did seek some clarification in terms of the fourth paragraph on vehicle crossings. I don't actually have the clause reference here, but in particular for rural vehicle crossings, I wanted to clarify that vehicle crossings would be upgraded or permanently closed if necessary. No, let's just say that again. So my suggestion was that at the time of subdivision or development, any regularly used vehicle crossing that provides access to the road shall be upgraded to council standard or permanently removed. And the distinction there is that the initial paragraph of the vehicle crossing sections talks about all regularly used crossings. I absolutely support that every property that is issuing from a development needs to have a primary access that's constructed to standard. In the rural context, farmers can have 10 gateways down their property boundary, and the way that clause reads currently, they would have to be upgrading every farm gateway to council standard. And if it's a sealed crossing, we are talking in the order of $10,000 a crossing in the rural context. And there are, over the last couple of decades in this region, there are a shift in how council roading staff interprets policy. And at times it's all the farmers' gateways have to be upgraded to sealed crossings, and at other times it's that primary access. So in my submission, I was really seeking clarification to how this clause is going to be interpreted and enforced really by council staff. Now the staff response was a level of flexibility for these situations is expected. The wording of this clause will be amended to allow council to have discretion in considering removal of farm gateways. So there was no comment regarding the sealing or bringing up to standard of all vehicle or of all gateways that front the road on any property. So when you seek building consent, when you seek subdivision consent, absolutely you need to have a primary access that's constructed to standard. If it's a sealed road, that standard is a sealed crossing. If you have additional gateways, my proposition is that those gateways that are not commonly used, sometimes, often only occasionally, sometimes once or twice a year, that they do not need to be brought up to that sealed standard. So that's really what I'm seeking clarification from in that clause that's written. The word discretion and council to have discretion in considering the removal of farm gateways is a separate issue. What can be a separate issue, and if it's a severely compromised gateway in terms of safety, then at development time you won't find us complaining about the requirement to close gateways. So there's 2 points there: the closure of gateways for safety reasons and the upgrading of gateways when they are seldom used. That's probably about it, really.
Thanks, Trish. Councillors, any questions for Trish? No?
Well, I'm just
Sorry, Paul.
just regarding your comments on gateways, and I certainly understand what you're saying, and as a farmer, I understand it totally. So the big part of the use of those gateways is actually farm related, whether it be stock or silage or whatever that might just come out over one very short period in a year. So you see that that is a valid use for those gateways in among all of the other sort of requirements that gateways have. So you're suggesting that it's only in the case of a development of extra dwellings, if you like, that rule should be implemented.
What technically council have the local government, actually, now this is going code of practice. Technically council can, under the bylaw anyway, so someone might have to correct me if I'm wrong, under the code of practice, under the bylaw, under the Local Government Act, council can march down the road and tell everybody that their gateways don't come up to scratch, and they can tell them that unless they come up to scratch, they can't use them, in which case the voting ratepayers won't be particularly happy and there'll be a lot of pushback. Generally, this only comes up when someone is subdividing or when someone is doing a development. That is the opportunity that farm gateways come to the attention of roading staff. And so while the project might be completely unrelated to the use of those gateways, and often isn't, I'm not proposing that gateways that are being utilised more from the proposal in front of council, I'm not proposing that those don't require upgrades or to be made to standard. I'm saying that there are no changes from the building proposal, land use or subdivision proposal, that those gateways that have operated that way for a number of years remain not upgraded, because their proposal doesn't have any effect on the use of the gateway. Does that answer your question?
That's very good. I just have in mind what council can be told by farmers too. Some of these things happen. Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions? Thanks, Trish. Appreciate it. Once again, thank you to the people who've submitted, not only those who've come along and spoken to them today, but also those who've written in. What I'm going to do now is call a 10 to 15 minute adjournment, just while council's technical staff would like to consider some of the points that were raised in the spoken submissions this afternoon. We should note that during that time, the live stream will continue, but the sound will be off. So the sound will resume when the meeting is reconvened. So I'll adjourn the hearing. Thank you again. All right, welcome back. I'll reconvene this hearing. Apologies for those who've been waiting on the live stream, but we've given our technical staff a chance to confer, having heard the oral submissions today. Just for a minuting purpose, we should also note that Mr. Nathan Shearing of Fat Hippo Design Group Limited indicated his preference to speak at the hearing. However, because of a conflict in the schedule, it wouldn't be possible for him to attend. Well, we're coordinating two councils, and it is a shame that he was unable to attend today, but we weren't going to reschedule it for one submitter. We do, however, have their written submission, which of course does form part of our process. So having been through and conferred, probably the best way forward is for us to go through the code of practice in blocks, and if staff want to make known any changes that that they feel are acceptable. And as we get to each of those blocks, councillors, if you have any questions after having heard the submitters that you want to ask, that'll be the time to do them. So the simple ones start first with clause 1.4. Actually, if we've got copies of that, can we send it around to the hearings panel?
So right. The introduction page.
Yep.
We go to page 35.
Relationship.
So clause 1.4, the clause should be updated to clarify the extent of jurisdictions between the code and the Building Act, and to include flexibility for some infrastructure to be constructed under engineering approval instead of building consent. Any suggested changes to that? Nope, so that remains as is. The next block of clauses are 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 and 2.4. Wave if I'm going too fast. That's the plus of paper sometimes. It's easier to quicker to flick through. And I must admit I've got a paper cheat sheet. So from a staff perspective, any comment on 1.2, 3, 4 or 5? I know, we're getting it photocopied for you. But the clauses are in the code of practice. Yes. None? Okay, next one's a larger block, which is 1.6 clause 3.2.5.4 down to 1.15, which is clause 3.2.20.3. It's like running through Acts of Parliament in a sense. Darren?
You just had a question around the provision of services like the phone and the electrical, and there's a submitter that talked about, well, there's a couple actually that talked about the need, is it needed for infill rather than new subdivisions? And I thought they made some reasonably good comments there about the why you would leave the services to be connected to the time of building. I thought that was worth just having a think about. I certainly agree with the not having to have the telephone line and stuff like that. That would make a few of our ratepayers fairly happy. I've heard about that one a bit, but yeah, I was just thinking for infill particularly.
Sorry, which clause was that you were referring to, Darren?
It was around, I think it's 3.2.41, the change of telecommunications. And it's just the discussion around the power cable as well for infill. I'm not sure if it fits totally there or somewhere else, but.
Yeah, so were you after a little bit of comment from me, were you?
Thanks,
I saw you looking at me, so.
Well,
yep.
however.
Yeah, cool, sure. No, I can sort of primarily help out with the infrastructural considerations that were made by the various teams as we broke off and talked about these things. Look, we really didn't make any distinction between infill versus greenfield style developments in our discussions. The prevailing thought from the teams that broke away was as sites are being created, they should be fully serviced, and the scope of access, three waters and utilities all falls within that realm. So we thought that power is an essential service, so that absolutely needs to be hooked up. Telecommunications is a bit of a different beast these days. Just have a look at what's happening with the likes of Starlink, for instance. So yeah, it's fully legitimate that in the not too distant future, people may not be needing that as a physical connection.
Yeah, I guess some people might suggest that would be similar with power. You can pretty much off-grid and be self-sufficient as well.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's getting back to the whole...
Less so in an urban situation.
Yeah, and this is a joint, so we need to consider that, you know, if someone was doing a rural, it could be considerably cheaper for them to go off-grid than to run cabling to a subdivision at times.
Yep. I think that's a legitimate consideration, but yeah, again, the joint will of the teams that went away and worked on this was that you know, we considered power to be a you know, fairly essential service that should be installed at the time of subdivision.
So if I can use an RMA comparison, when you've got something that doesn't necessarily conform, if there's a design option that mitigates, and in this case, say, off-grid power, is that an acceptable consideration under a code of practice?
Absolutely, we can consider it, and the code of practice isn't meant to be the be-all and end-all necessarily. So we acknowledge that there will be acceptable and alternative solutions, and if it's appropriate to use that, we'll certainly consider it.
Comfortable with that, Darren? Thanks, Paul.
Well, I'm just a wee bit of concern about that, because while one person in a particular property might think it's wonderful to be off-grid and all the rest of it, the person that owns that property next might be the last thing they want. So I think something as basic as electricity should have a provision provided for it. And I've even heard of people that have gone off-grid and then actually changed their mind after a while.
But then they can pay a connection fee.
Yeah, it was just about getting the infrastructure in there at the more appropriate time.
But it's a buyer beware thing. If you're the person who is buying a property that is off the grid, you are aware of that when you're making the purchase, and you can make the decision to purchase the property and go through the infrastructural costs to get it connected. So it's not like it's something that's not blatantly obvious.
Well, probably needs to be available to a boundary anyway.
Well, it would be available to the roadway anyhow, at minimum. Well, maybe some exceptions with power on long one-way roads. Good point.
With the telecommunication, the reason that Southern District dogmatically stuck to it for so long was, in the past, we had quite large areas of Southern that didn't have phone coverage, and there were some, and it was the thought about emergency calling really that was the main motivator. Things have moved on quite a bit from there. But
Not quite there yet. It's not till next year that we're all off satellites. But
it's true. Yeah. Anyway.
Yep.
Clause 5.8, the clause to be amended to suitably qualified person.
Yep.
How are we going to ensure the standards around what is a suitably qualified person?
Who wants to handle that? I guess it's up to it can be similar to qualifying somebody as an expert witness. It's up to them to prove their qualifications.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that as well. That's how it works in practice.
Okay.
So would it be fair to say that it was possibly pointed out by a submitter today that years of experience overrode or was equal to the piece of paper? So
depends on what that years of experience is in.
So if it's, let's use the example of Mr. Moyer, if it's in stormwater design and he's done a couple of hundred every year and he's still in business, That tends to indicate he's reasonably competent at what he does. So he would therefore be a suitably qualified person.
Are they registered in any way or form?
That varies from trade to trade.
Absolutely.
So some don't necessarily require registration. So, okay, on those clauses, any other questions or changes?
Are you following through?
So I'm on. Yeah, I'm on 1.6 down to 1.15.
Yeah, I wrote down a note yesterday on 3.19 about fencing, and I cannot find it today for the life of me, so I don't know whether I dreamt it or what. I think it might have been a question about the height of fences in certain situations.
Heights of fences would normally be controlled by the district plan, not necessarily the code of practice. Okay. Yeah, certainly in an urban environment here with our district plan.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this might have related to whether it was a walkway perhaps, and it was about lack of visibility for a public safety point of view. Don't follow what I said because I've probably got it wrong. Where are you?
So this might be in relation, you're thinking is right, it might be in relation to crime prevention through environmental design. We call it SEPDED. You might have heard of that clause before. We're certainly, adjacent to walkways in particular, we do try and limit the height of fencing, just so there's passive surveillance into and out of small spaces like that.
3.2.5, which was the height datum that was raised from an ICC perspective. Is there a response to the comments made by Mr. Moyer?
Yep, I think there are actually a few submissions on the use of correct datum and the latest datum standards that we use throughout the industry. There's an acknowledgement in our response to the submission that those are generally correct, and we'll be making the required amendment to that clause so it reflects best practice.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on that block? If not, the next blocks of beauty, that's 1.16 down to 1.35, so take your time as you have a look through. But from the staff perspective, any points that you're wishing to raise first of all?
No suggested changes to our recommendations, but happy obviously to answer any queries you might have.
Councillors, I'll give you a moment if you've got any questions. Please feel free to say out.
The first one, the clause 5.3.3.4, to do with that 0.5% versus 0.4%, that's just fine the way it is with the what you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, those are sort of fairly industry standard values to use. There was a submission suggesting, I think, was it from Absolute Land Suggestions, suggesting an even flatter grade, but we're pretty comfortable with what's in there in terms of the recommended and minimum grades where a site dictates.
Okay. On the right at the end of it, what is not on here, and I think the 5.4.12.2, it's about timber edging, and there's a submitter made a comment that it only gets smashed up by mowers anyway, etc. So I just wondered what your thought on that was.
Yeah, I haven't, to be fair, I haven't had a lot of experience with timber edging, particularly in relation to asphalt footpaths here in Invercargill. I have in Dunedin. A lot of my trade is formerly from Dunedin, and in Dunedin, it's a worthwhile edge to put in. It's a structural edge to a footpath, and helps the footpath stay together, basically. submission, our response there was that, yeah, essentially, as I've said, that if a asphalt footpath is hand laid, then it's appropriate to retain.
Clause 1.2, you talk gravel as an appropriate surface for private, rural private ways. However, the first 5 metres of the vehicle access within the site must be hard surface to reduce loose material migrating from the site. So if that's on a full gravel road with a full gravel driveway and someone's doing a build on that place, the expectation is that they're going to have 5 metres of tar seal or hard surface put in there.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. That's from the edge of the sealed road to 5 metres inside the property boundary.
It's only on a, so if it's on, so there's nothing to do with a gravel road coming into a driveway, it's only on a sealed road.
It's only on a sealed road,
Okay,
that's
just want to
correct,
get my
yeah.
head around
It
that,
doesn't
thank
apply
you.
to an unsealed road.
So gravel to gravel, no effect.
No
No, yeah, no
thank you.
effect.
Other questions on anything in there? If not, next block goes from 1.36, which is clause 6.3.4, through to 1.46, which is clause 6.5.
Mr. Chair, there was a suggestion from staff to amend clause 6.2.8 in relation to climate change following the submissions we heard today. I'll obviously let my colleagues speak to the technical details, but what the agreement in principle was is to change that clause to remove reference to temperature increase of 1.5 degrees, to amend the reference to the design horizon to 2050 to 2080, which apparently aligns with one of the other standards that was used, and finally to amend the wording around the design event to read, the design event is to be suitable to the site, i.e. the peak critical event.
Thank you. Malavika, you've got all these being emailed to you. Thank you for that. Councillors, any questions from you? The acknowledgement of the issue around climate change was the question that I had, so that's me dealt with. Okay, thank you. So we then move, the next block goes from 1.47, which is clause 7.3.10.3. It's like an old telephone exchange. Through to clause 1.52, which is 7.7.3. No staff suggestions?
So that, I'm not sure whether it was just the section that talked about manholes. There seemed to be some concern about manholes not being exactly the correct ones for, perhaps from a safety point of view and also from a installation point of view. Do you remember that comment this morning?
Yeah, I did recall the comment. I just trying to find the submission point.
It was by WSP.
Yep.
WSP.
Yeah. Oh, right, yeah. Referring to the wrong manholes getting ordered.
Yeah, or perhaps Brian is our President 3 Waters expert.
We did discuss that in our review of the submissions, and we didn't really feel like we fully understood what they were asking. But our opinion was that with the amount of mass concrete that we expect to be around the manhole, that we've not had any problems that we're aware of in shortening the life of the manholes, the expected life of the manholes. So whilst there possibly is better practice that we could be following, we'd need to look into that, and I think that's probably something we'd do within the next year, rather than, because we haven't seen any problems today.
So just from a process, we're bringing the code of practice, and just a reminder, it only sits in place for a year, which gives us a chance to see how everything beds in. So if during that year we do find that there is an issue that was raised in the WSP submission, that there's a chance for that to be addressed.
I think Mr. Ford did raise though that they weren't being installed improperly.
Yeah, I get it.
That was raised, and so for me, it's more around, you know, ensuring that we've got the standards right, that they are being installed consistently.
Yeah, well, standards have changed significantly since the Christchurch earthquakes, and we are probably lagging behind in that because we just haven't had the resources to keep up with that.
So is that a compliance issue or a contracting issue?
But one of the things that I push, well, it's just that we haven't adopted necessarily the latest standards. But so one of the things that I did push to be included in the new code of practice was around the work that's being done around seismic resilience.
So some of those issues that were raised around stormwater connections, for example.
Yeah.
I might be able to add to that a little bit as well, because I do recall that submission point now in a bit more detail, and it was around the sort of seismic performance of those manholes, particularly given the Christchurch example. And you're right, I had a chat with our Three Waters team about that specific point as well. And as Brian has mentioned, typically we put a lot of concrete around those manholes as well, so the connections that go into them have a lot more support. So we're quite comfortable with how our industry performs at the moment in the installation of those manholes. If there's a better way of doing it, of course, we've got this 12-month period where I think that we'll be looking into some of those submission points in a bit more detail, but we didn't think it was appropriate to change what we're doing at the moment, particularly because we have eyes on a lot, you know, those installations ourselves anyway. So we're doing that quality assurance side of things as and when these are being installed, A, under our own contracts, and B, under land development projects as well. So yeah, I think that there's no change that's recommended, particularly at this point in time, but it's a submission that we have noted.
And it will be monitored over the next 12.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Thanks.
Just a question around that 12-month process. What's in place to kind of ensure that the things that are picked up here and talked about is kind of going to progress to a review in a year?
So there will be a process put in place to capture all events coming up. That will be obviously a parallel process at both Invercargill City Council and at Southern District Council. Essentially, the review, for all intents and purposes, will start very shortly. So I think the hearing panel can be assured there isn't a lot of time for things to get dropped and forgotten. Conversations will commence with Te Marama quite shortly.
And several of the points that might not have resulted in action changes from today are things that are going to be considered and monitored. Yeah. Okay, so that's a process once we get through this. Anything else between 147 and 152? If not, I'm going to move from 1.53, which is clause 8.3.9, through to 1.63, clause 8.5.3.4. Any staff comments about that? No changes? Councillors, any questions? Largely formatic, actually.
So the 8.3 to do with those water main laterals and the earthquake resilience, perhaps aspect of them, I think that's quite an important one to get in front of, as it were.
Which submission point is that?
What I wrote down, if I've got it right, is 8.3.10.1.
Sure, just bear with me while I
bring that one up.
And that was about those parallel joints.
That was the stormwater connections.
Yeah.
No, it was water connections.
Water, beg your pardon. Yep.
That's page 176.
Sure, thank you. Again, it was the feeling from our team that there's no change required to this. The detail that's in the Code of Subdivision is a standard detail that performs well for our network. We didn't see a need to change that.
And even with talk about AF8 and all the rest of it, do you not think that there's some value in thinking about resilience in the future?
Oh yeah, it's probably part of a much wider sort of look at resilience.
So that was kind of covered off just previously, Paul, and that it's something that we're going to look at how we can implement over the next 12 months. We'll be
I
there for that
didn't realise
review.
that was part of that.
Yep. Although the relevant clause fell in 8.10, I think you're quite right.
Yeah, I think it did. Yeah.
Okay, 1.64 through to 1.66. It's just 3 minor amendments. Any changes there? If not, 1.67, 8 and 9. Again.
And there was an amendment needed from staff, Mr. Chair. Clause 10.4.1 needs to be amended. Suggested the easiest way to do that was to change the words "at the termination of" to the word "for," basically just to make sure the clause was written wrong. Basically, there was never any intention to require developers to do maintenance after 5 years, so we just wanted to change that to correct that.
Thank you. That's one minor addition. Other questions on that? And that brings us to 1.70 through to 1.80. None? Right, with those... sorry, Paul.
I must have missed it. But the issue that Trish Faulkner was bringing up regarding farm gateways, etc. Is there some thoughts about that?
Yeah, so our recommendation on that was, actually, I'll just double check just to make sure that I am correct. So yeah, the recommendation on there was to amend the wording to allow for some flexibility in the consideration of farm accesses. The concern there was that farm accesses, by and large, are put in without reference to council, without any sort of formal approval necessarily, because they're used every once in a while, mostly. At the time of subdivision, the feeling was that we wanted to retain discretion just in case any of those had been put in an unsafe location, or if there was material, for example, tracking onto the road that was causing an unsafe road surface. So we just wanted some flexibility there to be able to have a look at them. I think that we're reasonably happy that that every farm access doesn't need to be brought up to a driveway, residential driveway standard. That would be the case for the main access, but that was the thinking of the team, that we just wanted to retain some discretion there.
So that it remains discretionary.
I think new ones require permits.
Yeah,
the historic ones that are.
There's a lot of historic ones, but also you go past some sites and a new gate might have been put in an existing fenceway. So I think it still is happening. but again, if they're being used once in a blue moon and they're not causing a safety issue, then it's probably something that we're not going to pull out a bylaw or an LGA process to get rid of them. But at the time of subdivision, we want to retain that discretion to have a look at those farm accesses just to make sure they're safe.
Okay.
Yes.
So do I understand that you're saying that at the time of subdivision, there may be still some farm accesses that are don't have to be brought up to that level?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a pragmatic way of managing the network.
Sorry, I missed that too. What did we think about Don Moore's idea about allowing disposal of wastewater on a neighbouring property?
Do we have a response to that submission?
Certainly not something we consider desirable.
I would have thought that too.
Yeah, I mean,
it opens a large can of worms. Being able to have wastewater disposal on small lots would perhaps suggest that the lot shouldn't be that small. But as with everything, we're open to suggestions from the developers and where they can provide appropriate justification.
So there is the opportunity for discretion if there's an appropriate design solution presented.
Yeah. There always has been. It's not something we're
because and just
cover everything.
Yeah,
It's our preferred solution that we're suggesting throughout these documents, and we're open to reasonable, justified solutions.
And I think just to close that point off, that Don was talking about the complexity of the system in terms of its physical arrangements, but then the proposal is potentially quite a complex thing in terms of its legal arrangements as well. And who's to know how that system would be maintained in perpetuity into the future. I have some real reservations around that.
Not one of those things where the next person coming along buying the property discovers something that they perhaps weren't aware of. Okay, so we are at recommendation 5, and essentially it is as we have in the agenda, but with the addition of 6.2.8 around the climate change figures, and 10.4.1, which is a change of words for formatics rather than at termination of to 4. Those are the two changes. So the recommendation with those changes, is there a mover? Anya, seconded. Darren? Put that then, all in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Recommendation 6 is a recommendation to the Invercargill City Council to revoke the Code of Practice for Land Development and Subdivision Infrastructure Bylaw 2016 and adopt the Code of Practice for Subdivision Land Use and Development with the recommended changes that we've just noted under 5.
I'll move that.
Trish. And Pani has seconded it because she brushed her hair at the right time. Do you ever go to Todd's? We ended up with a lot of furniture that way. Okay, moved and seconded to put that, all in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Recommendation 7 is to Southland District Council to revoke the Subdivision Land Use and Development Bylaw 2012 and adopt the Code of Practice for Subdivision Land Use and Development with the recommended changes that we have just noted under 5.
Yep.
Councillors Duffy and Ravenclaw, thank you. Put that, all in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. 8, notes that the Invercargill District Plan hearings postponed until such time as the proposed Code of Practice has been finalised. Yes.
Okay.
Pania and Trish, thank you. Put that, all in favour? Against? carried, and notes the period for submissions on the Southland District Plan will be extended by 2 weeks, and hearings will be scheduled to follow this period if required. Thank you. Put that all in favour? Against? Carried. And finally notes that the first review of the new Code of Practice, which is what we were just talking about, will take place in a year to enable feedback from developers, along with technical input from Te Marama on how Te Māori is incorporated. And I think that's one of the things that we've dealt with here. Thanks, Pania. Seconded. Darren, thank you. Put that all in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Councillors, thank you very much for your attendance and consideration. Thank you very much more so to the staff who've worked collaboratively in the background to come to a new way of doing things. Say in 20-something years, he says, mumbling, it's the first time we've gone down that particular rabbit hole this far, and it's really encouraging. So thank you very much for that. There being no further business, I will close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.